Reveal the new D-Day 80th paint scheme.
At the Royal International Air Tattoo 2024 was this Eurofighter Typhoon FGR.4, affectionately known as Moggy, doing a splendid display in front of wowing crowds. Well, I assume so anyway, because whilst the crowds were being wowed and the Eurofighter was doing its thing, I was actually shoving a load of loaded fries into my face hole. But nonetheless, the sound was impressive, and I did manage to briefly pause from my feast and snap a single photo of this display on the Sunday. So fast forward to 2025, and the new Airfix starter set of the Eurofighter Typhoon finally hits the shelves. I initially had no real interest in buying this. The Eurofighter is generally one of the aircraft that I will go and get my lunch whilst it's flying, just because I've seen plenty of them, not just on displays. So naturally, today's video is showing me building the model I said I wasn't going to buy in the scheme of an aircraft I wasn't really paying full attention to, because that's just what I'm like. So, looking at the kit, it is a brand new tool. As I said, it was actually 2024 that it was announced and intended to be released, but it came out in 2025. The box says 43 parts, there is just one decal scheme, and it has a recommended retail price of $19.99, which includes all of the paints and a couple of paintbrushes and cement that you need to build the model. And I'm going to jump straight into the building of it. I did actually film an unboxing section, but due to a technical issue, by which I mean me being an idiot, there was no audio to it and I couldn't be bothered to dub over it. So we're just going to assume you know what's inside the box, and if not, there are plenty of people on YouTube who have already released unboxings. Construction will be more or less exactly as per the instructions, and it starts with this odd lower wing half section with the top wing half going on it. The reason why I say it's odd is because the bottom piece includes a big chunk of fuselage as well. So rather than wings glued to fuselage, etc., it is this bottom piece and this top piece. There was a tiny bit of distortion, so I did have to clamp it down nicely. I should have also mentioned that I'm cutting all the parts off in my usual way with side cutters, and the cement of choice is my usual Revell contactor. Sanding sticks, just the usual stuff to make everything neat and tidy. The fuselage half then goes on this piece, creating essentially half of a plane. You're building the port half and then gluing it to the starboard half, as you can see here. This is just a dummy fit. I have not applied any glue or anything. There is no cockpit, as you can see yet, but this was making sure that everything does fit nicely. You can see some gaps on the starboard side. Now, I don't know if that is the kit or if it is just me, but the bigger issue is this horrible seam all the way down the belly. Because the Airfix starter set paints are not my cup of tea, well, I mean, you shouldn't be drinking any paints, to be honest, but they're particularly not my cup of tea. I will not be using any of them during this construction. So I've got the Vallejo Black just being brushed on, the very basic cockpit piece, and the sides of the fuselage. There is no detail on here at all. It is all just one bucket type piece in the middle, but by painting the fuselage sides black, it masks it, and it kind of blends in, even though there's no real detail to see. We do have a decal for the instrument panel, which was applied on it is actually a separate piece. I just didn't show myself gluing it, but there is a separate instrument panel piece, and then the decal goes on top of that. I did also provide a little bit of glossy background to it, so just a bit of gloss varnish, slap the decal on there just to make it fit better. And again, we then have dummy fits before the final glue run of the two fuselage halves. Now, we will be seeing that seam again. I mentioned it earlier. I'm going to tape the aircraft together to make sure that it glues in line, but that seam along the bottom will be visible. And the main reason for it being visible is that there are no locating pins to speak of. On the top, yes. On the fuselage to the wing bit, yes. But on that entire long bottom edge, there's virtually nothing to line it up. You do have the intakes at the front. They help. But it's a large aircraft, and there's just nothing keeping that bottom together. So not ideal. Thankfully, the plans that I've got for this mean you don't really care about the bottom anyway. So whilst it's certainly an odd design, I'm personally not going to be massively affected by it. So now is when the full assembly just happens, you pretty much just stick everything else on. You've got the fuselage top, as you saw earlier, which includes the rest of the interior detail, and you've got this nose cone. The nose does have an indentation on one side, so it's impossible to line it up. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say impossible. Someone will find a way, but it shouldn't be very easy to glue it in the wrong direction in any way, shape or form. But if you do, well done, let me know. We have the canard planes at the front. They are very, very thin plastic, but they look all right, and you kind of have to align them yourself as to whether you want them up or down, and the rest of the detail can then be fitted, including these, whatever they are, on the wingtips. Please let me know on a postcard. The engine nozzles, or exhaust nozzles, are then glued in separately and aligned with a pin on the nozzle piece and a hole in the rear fuselage piece. We then have mounting points, or hard points, for they're the missiles, aren't they? They're the air-to-air missiles. There's no other hard points included on this kit. Again, won't affect me in any way, shape or form, but just something worth noting. And this is one of those aircraft that I'm actually going to do with the undercarriage up. So even though it's supplied with, was it 43 parts or whatever, I'm not even using them all. And you can also note from this that the hole you see behind the main undercarriage is for the stand, which appears to be oblong. Well, as far as I can tell, it should be round, because the pin at the top of the stand is round. So I don't really know what happened there. It's the first time I've seen an issue like this on an Airfix starter set, but yeah, it's not round. Still, with construction basically done, we can go back in time and take a look at my plan for painting this, because, as I've suggested, this is not going to be the out-of-the-box scheme. Right, the aircraft has been primed, as you can see here, just with some Tamiya grey fine primer, so we're just leaving that over here, and we're going to turn our attention to the painting. I have bought the Xtradecal X72355 Moggy Decal set, and I wanted to open this before we do some painting to discuss a couple of things, and, well, it's still sealed, so it'd be nice to have a look at it. An unbagging, if you like. The information on the front is just generic stuff about using decals and Xtradecal in general. This is what we actually want to see. So we're going to open this up and take a look inside at what we get, being very careful because it is a sticky package. Right, we have a second sheet. I'm doing it in reverse order. A second sheet of stripes. You can see there just the invasion markings, and then we have the main sheet. Now, I've used Xtradecal for many things before, and I have never once had a problem with them. They're made by Microscale, as you can see up there. Very, very nice. We have a lot of stencil detail. We have loads of warnings, and we have the extra thingies, invasion stripes, and some spares, some spare whites and some spare blacks. Now, before we look at the instructions, I just want to say that this cost £10, £9.99 to be precise, and I feel that that's a bit expensive, especially given that Xtradecal will give you often 3 or 4 or sometimes 7 or even 9. You know, they'll give you multiple aircraft to do from one decal sheet, and here they give you just one. Now, from their point of view, they are charging based on size, and this amount of paper is going to cost the same, whether it's one aircraft or multiple. I was well aware of that going into it, so I can understand it, but the reason why I wanted to look at the instructions is because I don't actually expect to use the invasion stripes. I'm probably going to paint them, and I want to get them out to measure them and assess the situation. This is the piece of paper that was forming the front, so that is going to go over there, put to one side, and this is the actual sheet itself. Oh, look at Moggy. Fantastic. Tells you which colours it's painted. So a lovely little bit of, maybe not history, but context. There we go. Based May 2024, although it was in the same scheme when I saw it at Riat in July. And it's a nice colour diagram of the side. There we go. Easy. And on the back, we have the top and bottom, and of course some modeller's notes. So, use the black coloured hash line walkways on the wings and the white walkways on the black stripes. I mean, that seems fairly obvious, but it's still always helpful to have it said. I just noticed that there there is actually some white ones. You can't really see them, they're there. But there are some white dashes as well. D-Day stripes are provided, but will need to be carefully trimmed to fit the airframe. Which is why, despite the shape of the aircraft, you just get slabs like that, which is not ideal. I'm not a big fan. I've done a video on this before. I'm not a big fan of decal stripes, so I will probably ignore them. But I just wanted to show you this before we get into painting, because I'm going to do some measurements and work out whether it is worth me masking Moggy before painting. Right, well, the decision was made and the Xtradecal Traffic White came out. Now, this is a very bright white. I usually use something a bit more dulled down, but the real Moggy is not painted with a broom like aircraft were 80 years ago. It's not just any paintbrush they found in any room and any white paint or whatever. It is actually, as far as I can tell, a vinyl. That would be the logical way of applying it, but they are very neat and very straight. So I've gone for a bright white. This is just being used essentially to provide a decent background to the stripes. I will, in a weird twist to my normal schedule, I will actually be using the decals, but I just wanted to paint the white basis first. The decals were then used to assess the width, and the white was then masked off accordingly, and we can start with the painting. Now, this paint is wrong. It's, as you saw, the Xtradecal Medium Sea Grey. This is what you would expect for an aircraft actually at D-Day, rather than the barley grey of a modern Eurofighter. The reason for this is simple. I had a pot of this, I didn't have barley grey. As it's a blue line paint, it is formulated for brush painting, so when airbrushing I have thinned it, again just with some Xtradecal thinner, and to avoid any grey going in the wrong places, I'm deliberately spraying at an angle which keeps it from running underneath any potential gaps in the tape, just with a narrow spray on my 0.2 needle before covering the entire aircraft with a wider spread. Nothing fancy on this one, I want the plane to look immaculate. Next, attention is turned to the top of the aircraft, and we have this dark sea grey. Now, this is not the 1940s one, this is the post-war sort of 1960s type colour, and according to the Xtradecal notes, this is the shade of grey that the top of Moggy is actually painted, which would make sense. It is essentially the same colour, except formulated to a modern paint standard rather than a Second World War paint standard. So either way, exactly the same process applies. Thin it with some Xtradecal thinner and just spray, avoiding getting the paint in those white patches. Then the attention turns to the dark green. Like with the grey, this is the 1960s version of the green. Again, according to Xtradecal, this is the actual colour that they have used on the real aircraft. This is a hard camo pattern, so I have masked off the relevant areas with just some rolls of blue tack, and I'm trying to remember and carefully checking those instructions to make sure that I paint the green on the correct side of it, although I did notice that there were some subtle differences between what it was telling me and what the internet showed, so I was mostly relying on photos online rather than the Xtradecal set. It's not that it's wrong, it's just the divide, for example, on the canard planes is more over to one side on the real aircraft than the instruction sheet suggests. So I went with photos for obvious reasons, but you get the gist of it on the instructions. With all the blue tack and the tape removed, you can see that the finish is rather nice, but there's still more to do. So I've taped off the leading wing edges and sprayed them with just some insignia white, and then we get out the RLM04, which is my bog standard all-purpose yellow, not a nice bright vivid yellow, but much more of an appropriate Second World War yellow, chrome yellow I suppose is what you could call it. And the leading edges were then sprayed in the same way as everything else. I just put the white background on there because yellow can be a bit of a bitch to paint, if I'm honest, and it can require a lot of coats. Well, I don't want that, so having a white base just makes it look nice and vivid without having to use an entire pot of paint on it and ending up with this ridiculously thick yellow. Gloss varnish, the standard Vallejo stuff, I use this for more or less everything, but I don't often show it, so I thought this time I would. This time I've swapped airbrushes because I now have more than one. What a surprise. First time in my life, more than one airbrush. And this is my old one. It's got a broken needle, so it's got a 0.5 in here, and it's just perfect for a big wide spread of varnish, so that is what I'm doing. Also just noticed that I didn't mention I'd painted the nose cone. It's a different shade of grey. I just mixed something up on the fly. onto the decals then, and we have this ridiculous sheet of predominantly stencils, and some of them are frightfully small. And then we have those 2 pages of stripes. So I'm starting with the stripes, and the stripes go over one of these. I'm guessing it's a base for a hard point. Logically, it's not something you glue on separately, which should be black. It is going to be an absolute pain to try and put decals over the top of that, but it's also going to be odd to paint it. The reason why I say that is I'm used to using 6mm tape for D-Day stripes, because that is the correct scale, if you like, for most of the aircraft that I would be putting them on. However, these ones are much smaller, and it's an odd size. There's something like 0.6 of a millimetre in there, and whatever. It's going to be hard to get it perfect. So what I decided to do was cut the stripes and make a back and a front piece like that. Then cut some of the spare strips, because they give you so many spares that you might as well, that I can then align the outer stripe just by piecing that up there. And these decals are very thin, so even though they overlap, you don't really notice it, and it's the underneath of the plane anyway, which, as I've said, doesn't really concern me for reasons that you, if you haven't seen already, will see very soon. The final black stripe can then just be painted. Oh, of course, there is also a triangular part needed for the front of the leading edge of the wing as well. This, again, was just cut by eyeballing it, but anything can be tidied up afterwards. The fuselage stripe over the top was cut to be a little bit longer, deliberately, so that I could then trim it. You'd rather do it longer than and trim it than shorter and not have enough. And thankfully, it didn't need to be curved in any way. Obviously, it curves over the fuselage. What I mean by that is the fuselage is a uniform shape, meaning you can just wrap a straight line around it and it fits nicely. For the top surfaces of the wing, I'd got a bit better with cutting my stripes, so I used just one piece on each of the wings. And then it was a glossy black being used to do the patching up rather than the matte black I had earlier. And then the rest of the decals were put on, but I didn't do too much filming of it because, well, it was hurting my eyes. I, in the end, avoided most of the stencils, and the simple reason for that is they were so small that you could barely see them. And if I was struggling to see them when they were on the sheet, then there was no point putting them on the plane, so most of them were ignored. If I couldn't see them on photos, there was no point putting them on the plane. The entire aircraft was then coated in matte varnish, again just thinned with some Vallejo thinner. I'm not sure if the aircraft should be matte or satin, if I'm honest, but matte seemed to look about right from what I wanted to do anyway. So now we have the pilot and the seat. These are glued in pretty much last, which is a bit unusual, but definitely makes sense when you're building it in context. The pilot was just painted with a miscellaneous green, and the seat, I believe the instructions tell you to paint it light grey, so I did, and I added a black cushion. Not that you're going to see much of it because there is a pilot in the way, and I used some Humbrol enamel flesh colour for the face. The canopy is one of those that can be clipped in rather than glued in, although I found it to be very, very springy. But you essentially slide it in the back first and then press down on the front, and it should be more or less secure. I, however, do not settle for more or less secure. I wanted it absolutely secure. So Rivel Contactor came out, and with a spot of glue at the back clip where the front touches, and then just a thin coat around sort of by the pilot, the canopy is going to be permanently fixed to the aircraft with no risk of pinging out and flying across the room. The advantage with using brush paints for the main colour is that it's perfectly easy to just do this, paint the canopy. I much prefer freehanding it. I didn't bother gluing it in and masking it. I just found that easier. And finally we have the stand, which I didn't show me gluing the two parts together, but for what I want, I'm going to need to bend it. So I have never done this before. I am melting a bit of plastic with a lighter, just getting it just warm enough to be a little bit more persuaded, and I'm just bending it with tweezers to get a little bit more of a bank angle on it. As you will see, that is important in my final plan. Once bent, the entire thing was then just sprayed in black paint, which I didn't show on camera, but you can imagine me just spraying it with black paint. And here she is, the new Airfix Eurofighter starter set with Xtradecal paint scheme as Moggy, with a much improved bank angle, which I just think really suits the display nature of this aircraft. How do I feel about the kit? Well, I'm a bit mixed. I didn't really have that much of a problem with it. The plastic is incredibly thin, especially around places like the canard plane and the tail, but it goes together nicely, so I suppose it's not really that big an issue. But then that massive gap that runs down the centre line, it's entirely because of the way that this is assembled, basically building a port half and then a starboard half and gluing them together. There probably is a better way of doing it, and it probably wouldn't result in such a big gap. I don't think it really matters that much to more experienced model makers, but I wouldn't recommend this to a beginner. It just seems a little bit risky, but I don't know. That's just my impression based on the starter sets I've made. This just feels like it's a little bit more complicated than the others. Ultimately, the reason why I'm so mixed about it is the result looks pretty good. It feels pretty sturdy. The instructions are incredibly clear, and it clearly captures the shape of the Eurofighter very, very well. For £20, yeah, fair enough. The size of the aircraft, okay. The paints, I'd rather they just didn't bother, but hey, I've heard they're better now. It's just for an experienced model maker, there is absolutely no reason in using those pieces of junk. The cement will go in my big pot of unusable cement, and the paintbrushes will come in very handy. Thank you very much. The decals were absolutely fine, although I'm a little bit annoyed that I couldn't use the walkways. I say couldn't use, I did try. They have black and white wingways, so black on all surfaces except the black bits and the white ones on the black bits, and I do think they look a bit noticeable in their absence. The real one clearly has those walkways, but they're just so fine and small. They basically just disintegrated, and after one and a half attempts I just thought, nah, sod it, it'll do. In general, I would recommend, if you're spending £10 on a decal set, then at least use more than the half of them that I did. But hey, never mind, it was a calculated decision for me. Your mileage may vary. However, we're not actually done, because whilst this is good and all, I think we can up this a little bit. This is the photo that I mentioned, the single photo that I took of the display at RIA 2024, and I've printed it out and I've put it inside this cheap frame. So all that is left to do is hang one on the wall and stick the other in front of it. And with that, we have a really simple way of displaying this aircraft. I'm very happy with the end result. It stands out on the shelf, even though it's surrounded by historically inappropriate aircraft. But yes, very, very nice. I didn't quite get the bank angle right. However, that is partly deliberate, because this just provides a better viewing angle of both. And at the end of the day, it's my model. I can do what I want with it. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you're that way inclined, and you can even become a channel member like these people appearing on screen. I'm very appreciative of their contribution, and it just keeps me buying silly kits like this that I said I wasn't even going to buy. So thank you very much, and if you'd like to join them, find out how below. But that is all for this video, so until next time, goodbye, and don't feed the carpet monster.